What if the world's closest friends are becoming quiet rivals? The US and Canada share the longest peaceful border on Earth, but beneath that calm surface, cracks are beginning to show. And if this partnership fractures, the entire future of North America could shift overnight. Picture the continent from 30,000 feet. Two nations stitched together by highways, power lines, pipelines, and family ties. Nearly 9,000 kilometers of undefended border. No tanks, no soldiers, just trust. Every day, almost 400,000 people cross that invisible line to work, shop, visit family, and fall in love. It feels peaceful, almost ordinary, but something is changing. The relationship that shaped the modern world, the partnership that built the most powerful economic zone on Earth, now stands at a crossroads. Are Canada and the United States still bound as brothers in prosperity, or are they slowly drifting into something more complicated and risky? If the answer decides the future of power in the West, what happens if they choose wrong? Because here's the thing, North America isn't just a cozy neighborhood, it's a strategic fortress. A fortress built on $3.6 billion in daily trade, $1.3 trillion every year, flowing like the blood of the continent. Millions of jobs on each side depend on that flow. 1.4 million American jobs tied to Canadian exports and 2.3 million Canadian jobs tied to U.S. markets. Canada is the #1 export destination for 34 U.S. states. Not China, not Mexico, Canada. These two economies are so intertwined that any rupture would feel like cutting an artery. So why do so many experts whisper that a quiet tension is growing, a shift from partnership to competition? Maybe the first clues are economic, because lately the smiles in the trade negotiations have felt a little forced. Think back. NAFTA was supposed to keep the relationship smooth, but then came tariff fights, steel and aluminum slapped with taxes, dairy and lumber industries clashing again and again. A single major tariff, 25%, could shrink Canada's GDP by 2.6% and even knock the US back by 1.6%. That's how tightly stitched together they are. When one bleeds, they both bleed. And yet, despite the risk and the collateral damage, Washington keeps hovering over the tariff trigger, forcing Ottawa to brace for impact every time politics heat up. Is this just political theater, or the first signs of a deeper rivalry? Because what happens when a relationship built on trust becomes transactional? When allies start negotiating like rivals who just happen to share a border? This tension doesn't stay in the boardroom either. It's beginning to echo through energy, the heartbeat of modern power. Canada supplies more crude oil to the US than anyone else. Pipelines like Keystone XL were supposed to be symbols of that shared destiny. Instead, they've become political fault lines. Both nations are trying to balance booming fossil fuel industries with growing clean energy ambitions, building EV sectors, funding green tech, and wrestling with environmental pressures. And in that race to define the future of energy, the US is beginning to see Canada not just as a supplier, but as a potential competitor. What happens when energy independence becomes energy rivalry? Maybe we find that answer in a place where the air tastes like ice and the sun hardly rises, the Arctic. Because as sea ice melts, an entirely new world opens up, shipping lanes that cut weeks off global trade and trillions in untapped resources. Suddenly, the top of the world is becoming the next geopolitical prize. China even calls itself a near-Arctic state, a message that makes Washington nervous and Ottawa even more concerned. The US wants faster military expansion in the Arctic. Canada moves slower, too slow, according to American generals. And when there's treasure and strategy at stake, patience starts to wear thin. Could the first real US-Canada clash in a century happen over frozen waters that hardly anyone has ever seen? And if that sounds dramatic, consider this. The entire security of North America runs through a partnership called NORAD, a joint shield that watches the skies and seas for threats long before they reach our shores. The US invests heavily in cutting-edge capabilities. Canada contributes crucial territory, infrastructure, and Arctic access that no amount of American spending could replace. Each side brings what the other can't. Still, pressures are rising. Washington pushes for faster upgrades. Ottawa pushes back, arguing that collaboration isn't just measured in dollars. If a major threat emerges, will both nations step forward with equal urgency, or will different priorities create dangerous hesitation? That imbalance doesn't just show up in defense budgets, it's cultural too. For generations, the US and Canada shared a worldview: democracy, liberal markets, freedom, all those common values. But as American politics grows more polarized, those shared values feel less synchronized. Canada leans toward multilateralism, climate policy, social safety nets. The US is wrestling with internal battles that sometimes spill north: guns, healthcare, cultural identity. The more each country defines who they are, the more they notice who they are not. What happens if these differences stop being friendly jokes and start shaping foreign policy? That question only gets heavier when a third power steps into the room: China, a country that both nations trade with, depend on, and fear. For the US, China is the strategic competitor. For Canada, things are messier. The arrest of a Huawei executive, 2 Canadians detained in retaliation, the trust between Ottawa and Beijing cracked and never fully healed. But Canada still seeks global markets. Why? Because 2026 is coming, the next review of the current US-Canada free trade deal, and nobody can guarantee it will go smoothly. If America closes the door even a little, Canada needs another exit. The government in Ottawa is already working to double its non-US exports. Why take that risk unless uncertainty is already setting in? So here we are, 2 nations who built their success together, now wondering where the partnership is headed. Are these just small storms in a long friendship, or early tremors of a geopolitical shift? To understand what's at stake, imagine 3 futures. Future 1, the reinforced alliance. North America doubles down on unity. Investments surge across the border. Factories, supply chains, tech innovation, all integrated. A powerful bloc that competes with China and Europe as one unstoppable force. Future 2, the polite distance. Still friends, still trading, but with more rules, more suspicion, more every country for itself. The border becomes a business relationship, not a brotherhood. Future 3, the hidden rivalry. Energy, Arctic routes, global markets, each becomes a competition. The undefended border stays quiet, but the trust behind it erodes, and in a world where alliances are everything, that could be dangerous. So, which future are we actually heading toward? Maybe the answer depends on something bigger than economics, bigger than pipelines and trade deals. It might come down to identity. How do 2 close allies define themselves as the world around them gets more crowded with powerful competitors? And what happens when their visions of leadership don't always align? Because for a century, the US didn't have to question Canada's loyalty. The biggest threats always came from somewhere else. But now the threats come digitally, economically, politically, and sometimes from so-called friends. Suddenly, predictability matters again. When the world is uncertain, trust becomes currency, and the exchange rate between Canada and the US is starting to fluctuate. Think of the 2 countries as siblings. One is the big brother with global power and loud opinions. The other is the quieter, strategic thinker who keeps the peace. They know how to support each other, and they know exactly where to hit if they ever choose to fight. So here's the real question, the one nobody wants to say out loud. Do Canada and the US still trust each other enough to face the future side by side? Because if they do, the continent remains a fortress. If they don't, the cracks will form where we least expect them. And history tells us something important. Rivalries don't start with wars. They start with disagreements that never got resolved. So as 2026 approaches, as Arctic ice melts, as China rises, as climate pressures grow, this relationship will face a test bigger than anything since World War II. Will Canada and the United States rewrite their partnership for a new era? Or will they discover that sometimes even the closest friendships drift apart? The border may still be undefended, but the future of North America? That's defended by decisions, the ones being made right now in Ottawa and Washington. And the world is watching. Because if this partnership fractures, the shockwaves won't stop at the border. The real story of Canada and the United States isn't about whether they've been friends, it's about whether they can remain friends in a world where alliances are fragile, power is shifting, and loyalty can no longer be taken for granted. So, friends or rivals? We'll find out soon. If you got value from this video, make sure to like and subscribe. And don't stop here. Click the video on your screen for another deep dive into economics. See you there.